Thank you very much for doing this today, Aaron. How are you?
Oh, very well, thanks. It's nice to be with you.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for making time. Caleb Jones getting traded is only going to further fuel the Seth Jones conversation. Where are we at with that right now in Columbus?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, Columbus, of course, has been sidetracked here. Shouldn't say it that way. They've been devastated by the loss of Matisse Kivlenieks, the goaltender, so things have sort of been put on hold a bit, but yet the calendar won't let them entirely stop with the hockey. You know, the sense is that Jones has made it clear to them which couple of teams, a team, two teams, maybe there's three now, that he's willing to go to and sign an extension, because obviously they'll get a much sweeter return if the team acquiring him knows they can keep him long term. Less so if it's a one-off, a rental. So that's key. And I think Columbus is trying to make that work, obviously, with the teams that Jones would be willing to forego UFA with. They would be first in line from Columbus's perspective, ahead of teams that aren't certain about Jones or that he can say right now would not sign with long term. So it's a deal I think that probably waits until after the expansion draft, but I think we'll have something before the end of the month, and the draft is probably when it gets done.
Your latest article at The Athletic is done in conjunction with Lisa Dillman, who covers the Kings, and it's hey, here would be the pros and cons of going to L.A. I'd have to assume that you believe that that's one of the teams on the short list. What does the short list look like in your mind as far as where Seth Jones might sign an extension?
Yeah, and so I think it's careful to say this has not been stamped by Seth Jones himself, or certainly not his agent, Pat Brisson. But I think the assumption with many people, the fair assumption, is that Los Angeles, Chicago, Colorado, Dallas are among the teams. Again, that I wouldn't put my hand on a Bible in a courtroom and say that, but that seems to be the feeling among teams and people around the league who tend to know these things.
Aaron, I believe it was Elliot Freeman who had made the comment that he believes that there was some sort of deal possibly in place with Philadelphia, but because of the fact that Philadelphia could not get confirmation on Seth Jones signing an extension there, they said, look, we just can't risk doing this deal. Do you have any insight on maybe something that may have been in place with Philly?
Yeah, I think Philadelphia is the team right from the start, Karen, that really, really wanted Seth Jones. That I think you may be correct to say they're the most aggressive team out of the gate for him. One of the things that's impacting this, and this is something I just learned a few weeks ago, we've seen this before, and Columbus has taken part of these trades, where you acquire a player, and then if you re-sign that player, there's a conditional pick attached. The Blue Jackets did this with Matt Duchene from Ottawa. They gave up a first-round draft pick, among other things, to get him. And there was a conditional other first there that if Columbus had signed Duchene, the Senators would have gotten an additional first-round draft pick from Columbus. Well, those picks are no longer. It is absolutely of utmost importance that the Blue Jackets try to find those teams with which Seth Jones would extend and go from there. And Philadelphia may really, really want him, but I'm not sure they want him as much for 1 year as these other teams would be able to give up if it's a long-term contract. So these are some of the dances that are going on behind the scenes.
So we've seen it before with players that are more disgruntled and asking for trades versus the situation with Seth Jones saying, you look, like, I want to test free agency. We saw it with Pierre-Luc Dubois, actually, in Columbus, but you think of the Matt Duchene back in Colorado, and these players did start with their teams and then were traded just as the season started, just after the season started. Are you still leaning towards the fact that Seth Jones is likely to be gone before the season starts, or at least at the end of this month?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question, because earlier this offseason, we think back to the time before John Davidson was here. Jarmo Kekalainen, the general manager, went on the record and said, we're not absolutely dead set on trading him this summer. We can go into next season, and maybe we'll get more from the trade deadline. And then John Davidson came back. He's now the head of hockey operations here. And without wanting to be seen as correcting Jarmo Kekalainen publicly, it's pretty clear that there's a change of direction there. John Davidson saying this is not 2019 with Artemi Panarin, where this team they feel has a chance to win it all, the Stanley Cup. This is a team that even with Seth Jones is probably going to be struggling here. So they're not carrying Seth Jones into next season. I think think of the risk that goes with that should he get injured. I think they're going to take the best deal this summer and move on. I think they're still open to Seth Jones saying, you know what, listen, the grass is not always greener. I might consider staying here. They have not burned bridges, these two parties. But unless something changes, and I don't foresee that, then I think Columbus is absolutely going to trade him here in the next few weeks.
Aaron Portzline of The Athletic in Columbus joining us here today talking Blue Jackets hockey. What's tied down? What's untouchable on the Columbus Blue Jackets roster right now?
Boy, that's a good question. There's not a lot tied down. Patrick Line, I'm led to believe if they get the right offer for Patrick Line, that he could be on the move again. I think there are some guys you look at and say, well, yeah, Max Domi's not going to be traded right now. He just had shoulder surgery. But who are they wedded to? Who are they building around? But those are the pieces that they're going to this summer with the 3 first-round draft picks. Look, Zach Werenski is going to have to make it clear to them here soon. What does he want to do? He's an RFA next summer when his deal's up. But what are his long-term plans? And then you think about some of the veteran players who may or may not have the stomach for a rebuild, because who knows how long those take. Does Cam Atkinson, a proud veteran, does he want to be here through this process? He's got several years left on his contract. I think this is a team that's going to be very aggressive and open to rebuilding the right way. And frankly, as hard as it is for some people to believe this, it's never really been done here in Columbus. They've had seasons where they've played like a rebuilding club, but they've not made the moves that match along with that. They've always tried to be as competitive as they could be, and they've always often finished in that god-awful 23 to 26 range, no man's land. I think with 5 years on John Davidson's contract and 4 on Jarmo Kekalainen's contract, I suggest that they're going to weaponize that term that they have and show a level of patience here that is much needed and frankly long overdue.
I've often made the comparison between the Buffalo Bills and the Columbus Blue Jackets because the Bills had this reputation forever of, well, nobody wants to play there. And finally, Josh Allen's the guy who put his flag in the ground and said, I'm going to be here. I want to be here. Come ride with me.
Yep.
And we see what it's done. And a lot of other things had to happen with management and coaching and all of that. By what you're saying, it doesn't sound like Josh Allen currently exists in the organization, or if he does, it's not obvious.
And I think you're right, and I think there's something that needs to be said about that. And I won't speak for Buffalo. I freaking love that town, for one. I'd love to. I love being in Buffalo. I don't know what that says about me. I love it, though. But I think this needs to be said about Columbus. Nobody has ever left here because of the city. I think that is way too easy. The city. And whenever people wonder why don't people want to stay with the Blue Jackets, they say, we don't know, the city's great. Well, they're not talking about the city. They're talking about the organization. What needs to be fixed is not the city. The city is fine. It may not be a draw to free agents. It doesn't have the international reputation, I'll grant you, of a Montreal, Toronto, L.A., Chicago, certainly not Miami. But I've never known a player that got here and said, I can't stand it here, I got to get out. That's never been the issue. Most guys are quite pleasantly surprised by the city. The other stuff that's got to be fixed.
Aaron, What about the expansion draft that's coming next week? There seems to be an obvious decision to be made in goal, and it can go a bunch of different ways. If there are three options, one of which is just live with it if they select one of your goaltenders, one of which is trade a goaltender this week so you get something in return, and the other being, who knows, maybe there's a more creative way to work around this and pay the way that they paid the last time to get somebody to stay away, Vegas in that case, to stay away from your goaltenders. What direction do you think management takes with the goaltending?
Well, goaltending for them, expansion-wise, is 100% fine. Korpisalo will be protected. Elvis Merzlikins is exempt. Matisse Kivleniek's Restisol would have been exposed to Seattle. I suspect at some point this week that Cam Johnson, who's a restricted free agent goaltender, he'll get a qualifying offer that will allow him to be exposed as the Blue Jackets goaltender in the expansion draft. He does qualify, so they're covered at the goaltending position. I think that the tougher read for them is at forward, where Eric Robinson for so long has been assumed to be the guy that's exposed. I think they're going to get a little creative with that. I don't think they like the idea of losing Eric Robinson. I think they protect Robinson, and I think they roll the dice by exposing either Gustav Nyquist or perhaps Max Domi, who, again, is recovering from shoulder surgery. Maybe they can get away with dangling one of those two guys out there. The assumption for most people is that they're going to lose defenseman Dean Kukan, but we'll see what transpires between now and then.
Aaron, what are you hearing with how Ron Francis is going about doing this expansion draft? We've heard he's obviously been very busy, it's obviously expected, but there's also the reports out there like, look, he's not going to do any general manager's favors. So if you want him to take money off your team, like, you're going to have to do it on his terms and with some big sweeteners. What are you hearing about what Francis has been doing or likely to do?
Yeah, as it should be, right? I mean, he's not doing any favors, and frankly, I think a lot of teams, Columbus included, learned a lesson in the previous expansion draft by almost overvaluing their own players and overreacting to losing certain players. And Columbus didn't get the worst of it, but look who they let go, William Karlsson. Wow, 43 goals his first year. Nobody in Columbus saw that coming. I think teams have vowed to be smarter this time around. I think you see way fewer no-move clauses, so teams are not handcuffed like they were last time. But if I were Seattle, I wouldn't be doing any favors either. This is the big time, people. I think his approach and the quote unquote not doing any favors is a response to teams feeling as though they learned their lesson through George McPhee in Vegas 4 years ago. So everyone thinks they're a little bit wiser this time around. Ronnie Francis is a fascinating guy. He's such a gentleman. He is such a Lady Byng candidate, but he is an incredibly competitive person, and those words resonate because I don't think he's going to let anybody get over on his franchise.
Aaron, before Pekka Rinne retired today, and then the fact that Bill Guerin bought out or will buy out both of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, the biggest news was the fact that Duncan Keith was traded to Edmonton for obviously Caleb Jones and a third, and no salary was retained. You saw Jones play against the Columbus Blue Jackets a ton this season. Keith play against the Blue Jackets a ton this season. What did you think of the deal, and do you still have the belief that Ken Holland does that in the right situation, Keith can get back to being a higher defenseman in the league?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, far be it for me to question Ken Holland. He is obviously, that's an exceptional general manager with a reputation that backs that up. To me, it's a great trade for Chicago. I mean, this is one of those. If you're the Blackhawks, the idea of being able to unload, just flat trade Duncan Keith and not retain any salary, that's a really good day. To get a promising young player, Caleb Jones, back, that floored me. And then in addition, at least a third-round pick. I think the Blackhawks got the kind of gift that the great teams seem to continually get. They always get off the hook one way or the other. And I think Edmonton let him off the hook with that situation big time. Duncan Keith has had an incredible career, but do I see him getting back to Duncan Keith again at the age of 38, which I think he'll be next season? That's hard for me. That is hard for me to envision. I think that's a player, again, an incredibly accomplished player, but there's so much tread off those tires. I suspect early or not too deep into the season, he'll start to look much like he did this year again.
And then the Oilers fans get even louder. Hey, Aaron, this is great stuff, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's a fascinating week in hockey, and that's going to continue into the draft next week as well. Thank you very much for doing this, and who knows, the way things are getting shaken up right now, we might be calling you tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you so much.